Here on the highest point of Long Island, the air itself feels like a fantasy. Cameras glide across perfect lawns, capturing the sparkle of crystal and the rustle of wedding gowns. This is Oheka Castle, a place where Taylor Swift smashed sports cars and broke hearts in a music video, and where the fictional media moguls of the show Succession spun their webs of intrigue. Today, it's the American dream in its glossiest, most romantic form. Thousands of selfies taken on this grand staircase scream of one thing: everlasting love, a fairy tale come to life. But this stone was not mixed with love. Its mortar is pure, concentrated spite. If you just quiet the music and the laughter, the walls begin to tell a different story. The story of a man whose cold, piercing gaze still seems to follow you from darkened portraits. Otto Kahn, financier, patron of the arts, immigrant, the living embodiment of the monopoly man. Top hat, perfect mustache, a cane, and the aura of someone who could buy or sell anything he saw. He didn't just build this castle, he willed it out of nothing as an act of defiance. Every toast raised here to a young couple's happiness is just an echo of a ruthless deal made a century ago. Every camera flash momentarily illuminates the ghost of a stock market crash. This place is not a monument to success. It's a monument to rejection. A fortress built against a world that had everything except the desire to accept Otto Kahn. He was one of the kings of Wall Street, a man whose word could move markets and topple empires. But beyond the gates of elite country clubs, his money fell silent. To the old blood aristocracy, he was an outsider, an upstart with the wrong accent and the wrong background. So he decided, if they wouldn't let him into their world, he would build his own. A kingdom so grand, so dazzling, they would beg for an invitation. This castle isn't a home. It's an architectural challenge, thrown in the face of an entire social class. It doesn't just sit on the land, it dominates it, asserting the will of its creator. Its spires don't reach for the heavens to find God, but to block the sun from its neighbors. From its very first day, Oheka Castle was a weapon in a social war. And here is the central paradox of this story, its unsolvable mystery. How did a man driven by bitterness and a thirst for revenge create a place that the entire world now associates with romance and happiness? How did a monument to personal spite become a collective fantasy of love? And why, as hotel employees claim, on cold nights, can you still hear the footsteps of its first and only true master in these corridors? The ghost who built his paradise on earth, but, it seems, never found peace within it. Before a single stone of Oheka Castle was laid, its foundations were set in hell. A hell of rusting rails, bankrupt companies, and the ruthless financial logic of the late 19th century. To understand this castle, you have to descend into the boiler room of American capitalism, where Otto Kahn forged his fortune. In 1897, the Union Pacific Railroad wasn't just a company, it was a giant, dying organism, the nation's steel spine, infected with the gangrene of debt and corruption. To most investors, it was a corpse waiting to be buried. But Otto Kahn and his partner, the railroad tycoon Edward Harriman, saw something else. They saw an opportunity, not for a rescue, for an autopsy. What they did went down in Wall Street history as financial surgery. But this wasn't the work of a surgeon's scalpel. It was the work of a butcher's cleaver. They amputated unprofitable lines, firing thousands of workers with the stroke of a pen. They redrew the map of transportation, redirecting traffic to where profits were highest. They issued new stock, backed not by real assets, but by their own reputation and the market's faith in their genius. For thousands of families left without work, it was a catastrophe. For Kahn and Harriman, it wasn't a tragedy, it was just math. And the math worked. From the ashes of a dead railroad, they extracted pure, ringing gold. The profits were colossal. Every dollar squeezed from this reorganization already had an unseen purpose. It wasn't yet a marble column or an oak panel, but it was already becoming part of the future castle's foundation. The ornate molding wasn't paid for with just money. It was paid for by the ghosts of closed stations and the shadows of laid-off workers. But Kahn's true coronation as a Wall Street titan came in 1901. It was war, a war for control of the Northern Pacific Railway, and his opponent was none other than the god of American finance himself, J.P. Morgan. It was a battle to the death between two financial philosophies, old money versus new, the established order against a brazen challenger. The stock exchange floor became a battlefield. Agents for Morgan and Kahn secretly bought up shares, driving the price up with dizzying speed. $110 a share, $200, $500. At the peak of the panic, the price hit $1,000. Small investors, caught in the crossfire of this battle of giants, were wiped out. Their savings, their hopes, their futures, all burned away in the fire of this war. It was a massacre disguised as stock trading. The war ended in a sort of truce, with the creation of a giant monopoly holding company. But for Otto Kahn, it was a victory. He didn't just make more money. He forced J.P. Morgan himself to sit down at the negotiating table with him. He proved that a new player had arrived on Olympus. His power also extended beyond America. When Tsarist Russia was bogged down in a war with Japan, Kahn's firm, Kuhn, Loeb and Kummer, financed the Japanese war machine, issuing $200 million in loans. This was more than a deal. For Kahn's partner, Jacob Schiff, it was an act of revenge against the anti-Semitic Tsarist regime. Money, once again, became a weapon. So, by the early 20th century, Otto Kahn possessed a fortune that was difficult to measure, and a power that made governments take notice. He could buy anything: companies, technology, even the outcome of wars. He was a king in a world where everything had a price. But he was about to learn that there are some doors that not even the most amount of money can open, and that his cruelest war awaited him, not on the stock exchange, but on the green lawns of Long Island. On Wall Street, Otto Kahn's money had an almost mystical power. It moved markets, resurrected dead corporations, and financed wars on the other side of the world. But here, on Long Island's Gold Coast, among the ancient trees and old money estates, it turned to dust. A different currency ruled here, the currency of bloodlines, breeding, and an unspoken code of belonging. And according to that code, Otto Kahn was an outsider. He could buy any mansion he wanted, but he couldn't buy a membership to the most exclusive clubs, like the Piping Rock Club. The rejection wasn't a loud scandal. It was a quiet, polite, and all the more humiliating verdict. The door was closed to him, not because he had too little money, but because it was the wrong kind of money. To the American aristocracy, who guarded their world jealously, he was a genius to be used, but not a man to share a cigar with by the fire. Humiliation is a powerful fuel. For some, it becomes poison. For others, rocket fuel. Otto Kahn didn't beg. He didn't complain. He decided to answer, but not with words. He would answer with stone, steel, and concrete. He wouldn't just build a house. He would build an argument in stone, so massive, so undeniable, it could not be ignored. His first step was an act of pure defiance. He didn't look for the most beautiful plot of land with a natural hill. Quite the opposite. He chose a vast, depressingly flat field. Why? Because he didn't want to fit into the existing landscape. He was going to create his own. If the land wouldn't give him a mountain, he would build one himself, an artificial hill that would become the highest point on all of Long Island. He would literally raise himself above those who looked down on him. Next, he chose his weapon, and it was a stroke of genius. He hired Delano and Aldrich, the architects of the establishment itself, the firm that built residences for the Rockefellers, the Whitneys, and the Vanderbilts. He took the enemy's own armorers and commissioned them to create something that would surpass all their previous work. He made them betray their class, using their own talent against them. And finally, the style. A French chateau. This was not a random choice. It was a calculated insult, a style that screamed of old money, European aristocracy, and centuries of heritage, everything he didn't have. He was putting a mask on his house, an architectural costume that was more authentic than the originals owned by his neighbors. From the very beginning, this building was a statement of intent. Its walls would speak a language that was not native to its master, but one he was determined to speak louder and more persuasively than anyone else. Oheka Castle wasn't conceived as a sanctuary, but as a stage, not as a family home, but as a theater of operations in a social war. Every element was designed for maximum effect, to display a power and taste he had been denied. It was the most expensive, most grandiose, and most calculated response to a single word. No. He didn't just want to be noticed. He wanted to be revered. The plan was simple and diabolically effective. If I can't join your club, I'll build a kingdom you'll beg to be invited to. The project was approved, the money allocated. But before he could challenge society, Kahn first had to battle a much older and more stubborn opponent, nature itself. The construction of Oheka Castle didn't begin with laying a foundation. It began with an act of geological defiance. Before the castle could rise, it needed ground to stand on. Not just ground, a pedestal. Otto Kahn conceived of something unheard of for a private residence. He decided to reshape the topography of an entire area to create the perfect stage for his architectural triumph. This wasn't a war with building materials. It was a war with gravity. For 2 long years, from 1914 to 1916, the flat, unremarkable piece of land on Long Island became a swirling vortex of titanic activity. Thousands of tons of earth, dug up by steam shovels, were loaded onto a temporary railway line built specifically for the project and moved from one end of the vast estate to the other. The air vibrated with the roar of machinery and the shouts of workers. It was like building the Panama Canal in miniature, or erecting the Egyptian pyramids at the will of a single Wall Street pharaoh. Day after day, week after week, the artificial hill slowly but relentlessly grew, rising above the bleak landscape. Its height was calculated to be exactly 90 feet. No more, no less. This wasn't a whim, but a precise calculation. This height made it the highest point on all of Long Island. The castle built on its summit would be visible for miles. It would become a new landmark, a new center of power. It would, both literally and metaphorically, look down on the estates of the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and all those who had closed their doors to Kahn. This mountain was more than an engineering feat. It was a physical metaphor. Every bucket of earth moved from one place to another symbolized the stocks Kahn bought and sold on the exchange. Every foot of height was equivalent to millions of dollars earned in financial battles. He built his hill the same way he built his empire, with absolute certainty, an iron will, and a complete disregard for the natural order of things. The neighbors, watching this grand reordering of their world, must have been in shock. This wasn't just building a house, it was a demonstration of almost godlike power, the power to change the very land they lived on. The land that had remained unchanged for centuries, now bent to one man's will. When the work was completed 2 years later, the landscape was forever altered. Where there was once a flat field, now stood a majestic, perfectly formed hill, ready to bear the weight of a castle. It was a throne, created by a man for himself. Otto Kahn had made his mountain. He had risen above everyone. But now he had to build something on that mountain that could withstand not only envious glares, but also the most relentless enemy of all, time. At the summit of his man-made mountain, Otto Kahn prepared to challenge not just society, but entropy itself. He was obsessed with the idea of permanence. In an era when the luxurious mansions of the Gold Coast, wooden palaces stuffed with tapestries and silks, regularly went up in flames like matchboxes, Kahn saw fire as the ultimate enemy of legacy. A fire could destroy everything: wealth, status, memory. So he decided to build a house that could not burn. His command to the architects was absolute and non-negotiable. No wooden frames, no flammable structures. Oheka was to be built of steel and poured concrete, from the foundation to the highest turret. This decision made the construction not just expensive, but astronomically so. It was revolutionary for a private home. This was how you built skyscrapers, bridges, and industrial plants. Not residences. Every span, every wall, every floor was poured concrete over a steel frame. This made Oheka not just a house, but a fireproof bunker, a fortress designed to withstand not just a stray spark from the fireplace, but the apocalypse itself. The walls, 3 feet thick, created a feeling of permanence, of eternity. They didn't just support a roof, they declared their right to stand here forever. This choice of materials was deeply symbolic. Wood was the material of the old aristocracy, alive, warm, but vulnerable. Steel and concrete were the materials of the new era, the era of industry, the era of Wall Street. Cold, soulless, but eternal. Kahn was building his house from the same elements he used to build his financial empire: cold calculation and an unbreakable structure. He was creating not just a home, but a vault for his ego, for his dynasty, for his immortality. As the workers poured tons of concrete into the forms, they may not have realized it, but they were casting their master's soul into the very material. A soul hardened in the fire of stock market wars, impervious to criticism, and resistant to any external threat. Oheka Castle was taking on its character. It was becoming solid, unyielding, and a little cold. This was a house that didn't embrace you. It impressed you. It didn't warm you. It demonstrated power. This fireproof construction was the ultimate form of control. Kahn controlled markets. He controlled the landscape. And now he was trying to control the laws of physics itself. He was building a castle that was meant to outlive not only him, but his children, his grandchildren, and perhaps even the civilization that created him. He was creating an artifact. But in this obsession with permanence, there was a hidden anxiety. A man so terrified of fire, perhaps subconsciously felt he was creating something that could provoke an all-consuming hatred. He was building a fortress because he knew he had enemies, and he wanted to be sure that when they came with torches, his walls would hold. He did not yet know that the greatest threat to his legacy would not come in the form of fire, but in the form of indifference. Behind every grand vision carved in stone, there are thousands of nameless hands. Oheka Castle wasn't built by the genius of architects and the money of Otto Kahn alone. It was raised by an army of immigrants who, like Kahn himself, had come to America seeking a better life, but found themselves on the opposite end of the food chain. At the peak of construction, over 1,000 men worked here simultaneously on this artificial hill. It was a modern-day Babel. Italian stonemasons, whose fathers and grandfathers had built villas in Tuscany, now shaped limestone for an American palace. Irish carpenters, who had fled famine, created intricate oak panels for libraries they would never read in. German engineers, armed with slide rules, ensured that the tons of concrete and steel were placed exactly according to the blueprints. Their voices are almost lost to history. There are no diaries describing their lives, no letters home telling of the hardships. They are the silent majority whose legacy is the castle itself. Their sweat and blood were literally absorbed into the concrete, becoming part of its mortar. It was a city within a city. Temporary barracks, mess halls, and forges were built on the estate grounds. The smoke from field kitchens mingled with construction dust. Dozens of languages were spoken here, but everyone was united by the language of hard physical labor. They worked 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. In the heat and the cold, the conditions were harsh and at times dangerous. Scaffolding in those days was far from modern standards. Safety regulations were almost non-existent. A single mistake, a single misstep could lead to injury or death. How many accidents occurred on this site? Official history is silent. But every stone in this wall was lifted by immense human effort, and possibly by someone's life. And herein lies Oheka's greatest paradox. A palace for one immigrant who achieved incredible success was built by the hands of hundreds of other immigrants for whom the American dream remained a distant horizon. Otto Kahn may have seen them only as a workforce, as cogs in his giant machine, but did he not see in their faces, in their fatigue, in their hope, a reflection of his own journey? The journey of a man who also arrived with nothing and achieved everything himself. Were there strikes? Were there conflicts? Probably. A project of this scale could not have been without friction, but the client's will was absolute, and the flow of money was endless. Any problems were solved quickly and decisively. The machine could not be stopped. When we look today at the elegant stone carvings or the perfectly fitted floorboards, we see only the final result, a triumph of luxury. But behind this beauty lies an untold saga of human perseverance, the story of 1,000 men who left their fingerprints on this castle. They were its first, and perhaps its most honest inhabitants. They built a paradise for another man, one they themselves would never be allowed to enter. While Otto Kahn's army of builders erected the walls of his kingdom on Long Island, the world around them was writhing in agony. 1914. Europe had plunged into the bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen. The Great War. Newspaper headlines screamed of millions dead, of the filth of trenches, of starvation and destruction. And at that very same time, ships crossed the Atlantic, dodging German U-boats, loaded not with weapons and medicine, but with marble from Italy, slate from France, and antique tapestries from England. All of it destined for a single home. The construction of Oheka Castle, which began the year the war broke out and finished after it had ended, was an act of staggering, almost surreal, indifference to world events. As the American nation was slowly drawn into the conflict, as mothers sent their sons to die in the fields of Flanders, Kahn was buying up the treasures of the old world to decorate his new palace. This construction was no longer just a display of wealth. Now, against the backdrop of universal suffering, it became a deafening slap in the face of public taste and morality. Newspaper cartoonists found a new target for their ridicule. Kahn was depicted as a modern-day Nero, building himself a palace while the world burned. Oheka was called a monument to selfishness, needless vulgarity, and offensive luxury. Otto Kahn's conflict had reached a new level. He was no longer just up against his envious neighbors. He was defying the spirit of the age, the conscience of an entire nation. In an era when everyone was being urged to conserve, to sacrifice, to buy Liberty bonds, he was spending millions on marble staircases and a private golf course. Every dollar invested in his castle was a dollar not invested in the war effort. Kahn himself, a German immigrant, found himself in an extremely awkward position. His loyalty was questioned, his motives scrutinized, and although he actively supported America's war effort financially, this giant castle, built with money earned in part from international war loans, became for many a symbol of the cynicism of the financial elite. A symbol that for some, war is not a tragedy, but just another line in a ledger. Oheka Castle grew while an entire generation of young men was dying. Its walls rose ever higher, as if trying to block out the screams of pain coming from across the ocean. It was a feast in a time of plague, a festival of luxury in the midst of universal grief. And when construction finally finished in 1919, the castle stood before the world not just as an architectural marvel, but as a monument born in the crucible of history's most tragic period. It was beautiful, and it was completely out of place. Once the stone heart of the castle was complete, Otto Kahn turned his attention to what would become its soul, the gardens. But he wasn't seeking natural harmony. He was seeking absolute submission. For this task, he hired the best of the best, the Olmsted brothers, sons of the legendary Frederick Law Olmsted, the man who created Central Park in New York. Kahn wasn't just hiring landscape architects. He was hiring a dynasty, a name that was itself a mark of the highest prestige. Their mission was clear: create a paradise on the summit of his man-made mountain, a paradise designed with mathematical precision. No wild English landscapes, only strict, formal French gardens in the style of Le Nôtre, the architect of Versailles. Perfectly trimmed hedges, symmetrical flower beds, geometrically precise pathways, and fountains that sprayed on a strict schedule. This was not an attempt to collaborate with nature. It was a declaration of its complete and unconditional conquest. But nature proved to be a more stubborn opponent than Wall Street. It refused to submit. The artificial hill, lacking natural water sources, turned into a scorching pan in the summer. The soil, hastily brought in and laid down, refused to accept the rare trees and exotic flowers ordered from Europe. The Second Great Battle of Oheka began, a battle for every single sprout. A dry summer threatened to destroy everything that had been planted with such effort. Dozens of gardeners with buckets and hoses waged a daily, grueling war against the baking sun. The constant risk of fire, which could in an instant turn the meticulously planned paradise into a scorched wasteland, was ever present. Every perfectly manicured lawn was the result of titanic effort. Every arrow-straight path was won through a struggle with weeds and erosion. The Olmsted brothers and their army of gardeners were generals on an invisible front. They fought not against armies, but against drought, not against enemy infantry, but against insect invasions. And in this struggle, the entire philosophy of Otto Kahn was revealed. For him, beauty was synonymous with control. Wild, untamed nature was as alien to him as an unpredictable stock market. He wanted to see a world around him ordered by his will. These gardens were not a place for rest and contemplation. They were just another room in his palace, but without a roof. They were a green diagram of his power, where every plant knew its place and obeyed the master plan. In the end, as in all his battles, Kahn won. Money and persistence crushed nature's resistance. The gardens bloomed, the fountains flowed, and the hedges formed perfect green walls. He got his Versailles, but it was a cold beauty. It was the beauty of triumph, not harmony. A beauty born not from a love of nature, but from the desire to prove that one man, in this case, one particular man, could remake the world in his own image. Oheka Castle was designed as a perfect theater. On its magnificent stage, a play about a luxurious, effortless, and flawless life was performed. Guests glided across marble floors, admiring the perfect order, the fresh flowers in vases, and the dishes that appeared on the tables as if by magic. But behind the curtain of this theater hid another world, a world designed to remain invisible. This is one of the most astonishing and eerie secrets of the castle, its second, hidden circulatory system, a parallel universe of narrow, utilitarian corridors built directly inside the thick walls. Through these arteries, stripped of gilding and silk, an army of 126 servants moved silently. Maids, footmen, cooks, laundresses, they were the blood that sustained this giant organism, but they were never to be seen. Imagine this dual world. In the grand dining hall, Otto Kahn's guests discuss opera and stock prices, and just a few feet away from them, behind an oak panel, a footman carries a tray with hot soup down a narrow, dimly lit passage, trying not to make a sound. A maid could change the linens in a bedroom, entering and exiting through a secret door in a closet, and a guest returning from a walk would never know someone had been in their room. These corridors were a brilliant piece of engineering. They allowed the staff to move between the kitchens, laundries, storerooms, and living quarters without ever crossing paths with the masters and their guests. This created the illusion that the house ran itself. The magic happened on its own, while all the grim, exhausting work, the cleaning, the washing, the cooking, was hidden behind the walls, as if it were something shameful. Walking through these narrow, claustrophobic passages today, you feel like you're inside the mechanism of a giant clock. Everything here is subordinate to function: bare concrete walls, simple electric bulbs, steep spiral staircases. This is a world without windows, a world without excess, a world where people were reduced to the role of silent ghosts, whose only task was to maintain the illusion for those living on the bright side of the wall. This system is not just an architectural feature. It is a social philosophy frozen in concrete. It divided the world into those who are seen and those who must remain unseen, the consumers of luxury and its invisible creators. Oheka was designed as a perfect society in miniature, as Kahn perhaps saw it, a flawless facade hiding a well-oiled but completely depersonalized machine. These corridors are the most honest place in the castle. They are free of pretense. They tell the truth about the price that was paid for all that glamour. The price was the invisibility of 126 people. They were here. They breathed this air. They left their prints on these walls. But to history, just as to Otto Kahn's guests, they were meant to remain ghosts. As the walls of Oheka grew, so did the irritation of the neighbors. The massive construction, which dragged on for years, had turned a quiet corner of Long Island into a humming industrial site. The noise, the dust, and the endless stream of work trucks were a constant reminder of the invasion. But that was just a prelude to the real war. Not everyone was prepared to silently watch as a Wall Street upstart remade their world. One of the neighbors, a representative of old money whose estate bordered Kahn's property, decided to fight back. His weapon was not a stock market scheme, but a lawsuit. The accusation was almost poetic. He claimed that the giant castle being built on an artificial mountain was casting a shadow upon his land. This wasn't just a complaint about a lack of sunlight. It was the legal cry of the old world, protesting the audacity of the new. Oheka's shadow was a metaphor. It symbolized the shadow that Kahn's new money was casting over the established order, over their privileges, over their sense of superiority. The lawsuit was an attempt to prove that there were lines that not even Otto Kahn could cross, that some things couldn't be bought, like the right to block your neighbor's son. The legal battle became a local spectacle, watched by the entire Gold Coast elite. It was a battle of David and Goliath, if David were a hereditary aristocrat and Goliath were a financial titan. Two Americas clashed in the courtroom, one clinging to heritage and tradition, and the other believing that progress and capital had the right to demolish anything in their path. Kahn's lawyers were as ruthless as their client was on the stock exchange. They presented maps, sun exposure calculations, expert testimonies. They turned the poetic metaphor of a shadow into a dry, boring set of facts and figures. They argued that a property owner's right to build on his own land was sacred, especially if that owner had virtually unlimited resources to defend that right. The outcome was predictable. Kahn won. The court ruled that his castle, however enormous, broke no laws. This was more than just a legal victory. It was another triumph, perhaps the most painful one for his enemies. He had proven that in the new America, even the law, which was supposed to be blind, could see more clearly on the side of power. Oheka's shadow continued to fall on the neighboring property, now legally sanctioned. It became an eternal, silent reminder of who was in charge. Kahn had won the battle for the land. He had won the battle with nature. And now, he had won the battle with the law. His fortress was becoming ever more impregnable. But each victory only increased the number of those who secretly wished for his defeat. As construction neared its end and the castle began to take its final form, it became clear. This was not just a house. It was a self-portrait, rendered in stone, marble, and steel. A manifesto of ego so powerful, you could read it just by walking through the halls. It all began with the name. The owner didn't look to history or geography for inspiration. He took his own name, Otto Hermann Kahn, and turned it into an acronym. Oheka. 3 syllables, cast in bronze above the main entrance, sounding almost like a royal decree. It wasn't the name of an estate. It was the artist's signature on his greatest masterpiece, a signature the size of a facade. And then, the grand staircase. Copied from the famous horseshoe staircase at the Palace of Fontainebleau, it was the architectural heart of the entire building. But its function wasn't to conveniently connect floors. Its one true purpose was to create a moment of theater. It was designed for a single scene. The master of the house, Otto Kahn, appears at the top, pauses for a moment, and surveys his guests gathered in the ballroom below. In that moment, he wasn't just a gracious host. He was a monarch looking down on his court. The staircase was an instrument of power, a way to establish a hierarchy without saying a word. All eyes turned upward, all conversation ceased. This entire enormous house, with all its luxury, was merely a stage for the triumph of one man. Every detail screamed it. Portraits of Kahn and his family, painted by the best artists, hung in the most prominent rooms, rivaling the canvases of old masters. Personal monograms were embroidered on linens, engraved on silverware, woven into the patterns of the carpets. The castle was saturated with the presence of its creator, his tastes, his ambitions. Even in the library, a place supposedly for solitude and reflection, everything was designed for display. Thousands of leather-bound books, many of which were likely never opened, were meant to symbolize not a love of reading, but the intellectual superiority of the owner. Behind one of the bookcases, legend has it, there was a secret passage, another attribute of power, the right to a secret world, hidden from the eyes of mere mortals. Oheka Castle was the final touch that transformed Otto Kahn from just a rich man into a mythological figure. He hadn't built a home, he'd built a personal monument. A monument to his will, his taste, his success. He had carved his ego in stone, hoping it would last for centuries. But when you build such a massive monument to yourself, you inevitably invite the wrath of those who believe you don't even deserve a simple headstone. The year is 1920. The castle has just been completed. Its new walls still smell of paint and wood. On Wall Street, in the heart of his financial empire, Otto Kahn is receiving visitors. The day is like any other. Numbers, deals, telegrams. But there is a tension in the air that can't be measured by stock tickers. All the hatred, all the frustration, all the anger generated by his ruthless operations had been accumulating for years, condensing, looking for an outlet. And on this day, it found one. The door to his office opens. Standing there is a man named James Frankfurter, a former sailor. There is no request for a loan in his eyes. In his eyes is all the pain of a man crushed by the gears of Wall Street. To him, Kahn is not just a banker. He is a symbol, the living embodiment of the system that destroyed him. In Frankfurter's hand is a pistol. A shot rings out. Then a second. The sound echoes through the corridors where usually only the rustle of banknotes is heard. In that moment, all of Kahn's external conflicts, the hatred of his rivals, the condemnation of the press, the envy of his neighbors, materialize into one small piece of lead flying across the room. All the world's abstract hostility becomes a concrete, physical threat. But the bullet does not find its mark. It gets caught in the banker's thick overcoat. The unbelievable happens. Otto Kahn, a man used to fighting with numbers on paper, doesn't fall, doesn't scream, doesn't call for help. With an icy, almost inhuman calm, he takes a step forward and personally disarms his attacker. Later, when the police arrive, Kahn refuses to press charges. He states that the attacker was obviously not in his right mind. This gesture is not a sign of mercy. It is the ultimate form of aristocratic contempt. To Kahn, this man is not an enemy, not an avenger. He is merely an annoyance, a madman not even worth the time it would take to prosecute. The incident instantly becomes a Wall Street legend. It only strengthens the myth of King Otto, imperturbable, indestructible, invincible. A man who can be broken by neither a market panic nor a bullet fired at point-blank range. But behind that mask of invincibility, a crack had appeared. Kahn could build himself a fireproof fortress. He could surround himself with an army of servants. He could win any lawsuit. But now he knew for certain. His castle could protect him from fire, but not from hate. And that hate was not somewhere far away, beyond the walls of his estate. It could walk into his office at any moment. He had built his perfect citadel, but he failed to consider that the greatest threat never comes from the outside. It comes from the world he himself had created. The walls of Oheka finally came to life. The castle, built as a theater, threw open its doors, and the longest, most dazzling show of the 1920s began. The Jazz Age burst into its halls, filling them with the sound of saxophones, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the laughter of the most brilliant society in the world. Otto Kahn's parties became legendary. On his emerald lawns, Charlie Chaplin might be seen discussing a new film with Hollywood moguls. In his dining room, the great tenor Enrico Caruso gave private concerts for guests that could include the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Here, in this man-made utopia, worlds collided. Wall Street and Broadway, Washington and Hollywood. Among the guests, a young, observant writer named F. Scott Fitzgerald could often be found. He absorbed the atmosphere, the ostentatious luxury, the hidden melancholy, the desperate gaiety. Oheka Castle, with its grand celebrations hosted by a mysterious man with a shadowy past, became one of the primary inspirations for J. Gatsby's estate. Kahn, like his literary counterpart, threw these feasts not so much for his own enjoyment, but to prove something to the world. Every firework that soared above the castle was another argument in his endless dispute with those who had rejected him. But behind the glittering facade of this perpetual party, a quiet family drama was unfolding. The castle, built to impress hundreds of guests, proved to be unbearably cold and empty for the few who were supposed to call it home. Otto's wife, Addie, was said to have hated the gigantic, echoing space. She was oppressed by its scale, its formality, its constant publicity. She preferred a secluded life at their more modest estate in England, far from this endless masquerade. For the guests, Oheka was a paradise, a place where the wildest fantasies came true. But for the family, it increasingly became a gilded cage. The children grew up surrounded by servants, in halls where it was easier to get lost than to find a cozy corner. The house was like a museum they happened to live in, majestic, flawless, and utterly unsuited for the warmth of human connection. Otto Kahn had achieved his goal. He created a kingdom that people lined up to enter. He became the center of his own universe. But in the process, he built something that was wonderful for everyone except his own family. The castle was his greatest triumph, and perhaps his most profound personal failure. It was built for society, not for living. It was a monument to one man's ambition, not a hearth for his loved ones. And this inner emptiness, hidden behind the brightest glamour, would one day consume it. In October of 1929, Otto Kahn's world cracked. The Wall Street crash, the Great Depression. It wasn't just a financial crisis. It was an earthquake that shattered the very belief in perpetual progress and limitless possibility upon which Oheka Castle was built. Kahn himself, thanks to his genius and foresight, was not ruined. But the world for which he had built his castle collapsed overnight. The Jazz Age suffocated in the dust of failed banks and soup lines. Flaunting wealth, throwing lavish parties, and maintaining a staff of 126 servants, all of this transformed from eccentric luxury into an offensive display of immorality. The castle, conceived as a stage for triumph, suddenly looked like the ballroom on the sinking Titanic. The upkeep of Oheka became an absurd, unbearable burden, even for Kahn. It was no longer a symbol of success. It had become a monument to a bygone, irretrievably lost era. The walls that were meant to protect him from the world now seemed to wall him off from the harsh reality the rest of the country was living. And then, on March 29th, 1934, the main engine of this gigantic machine stopped. In his Wall Street office, the very place where he had once survived an assassination attempt, Otto Kahn's heart gave out. He died as he had lived, at his post, at the center of the financial universe. He was 67 years old. With his last breath, the era of Oheka ended. The soul left the stone body. the castle was instantly orphaned. It was so intrinsically linked to the personality, the will, and the ego of its creator that without him, it became just a giant, impossibly expensive pile of stone. His 4 children, who had grown up in the shadow of this monument, felt no sentimental attachment to it. To them, it wasn't a home, but their father's obsession, the gilded cage of their childhood. They had neither the desire nor, more importantly, the means to carry this colossal burden. The decision was swift and ruthless. The legacy that Kahn had so carefully built to last for centuries was put up for sale, and the price paid for it in 1939 became the final, cruelest irony of his story. Oheka Castle, the palace on which $11 million had been spent, was sold for just $100,000. The dream had died with the dreamer, and now his immortal fortress would have to face an enemy far more terrifying than fire or hate: oblivion. The end of Otto Kahn's story marked the beginning of a long, agonizing fall for his greatest creation. Oheka Castle, deprived of its king and his money, began its journey into hell. First, it became a retirement home for city sanitation workers, a bitter irony for a palace built with such aristocratic disdain. Then, during World War II, its corridors filled with radio operator cadets. But the worst was yet to come. For 30 years, from 1948 to 1979, the castle served as a military academy. In the name of efficiency and utility, its new owners waged war on its luxury. Priceless frescoes were covered with institutional oil paint. Marble floors were poured over with gray concrete. The exquisite French gardens were bulldozed to make way for a parade ground. It was the slow, methodical murder of the building's soul. And in 1979, when the academy closed, darkness fell. The castle was completely abandoned. It became a ghost on its own hill, open to the elements and to vandals. In 5 years of neglect, it suffered more than 100 arson attacks. The windows were smashed, the walls covered in ugly graffiti. Everything that could be pried off, broken out, and carried away was stolen. The ballroom where Charlie Chaplin once danced stood with a collapsed roof, filled with trash and debris. By the early 1980s, bulldozers were ready to wipe this shameful reminder of past glory off the face of the earth. It seemed the story was over. The castle built to survive for centuries had not lasted 60 years. But at that very moment, when all hope was lost, a new dreamer appeared. A developer named Gary Melius, a man who, unlike everyone else, saw not a hopeless ruin, but the chance for a new beginning. Everyone thought he was crazy when he bought the wreck for $1.5 million in 1984. What followed became the largest private restoration project in United States history. For nearly 20 years, investing over $40 million, Melius waged his own war, a war for resurrection. He found the original blueprints in archives. He hired the finest craftsmen. Layer by layer, detail by detail, he returned the castle's lost soul. And a miracle happened. The ruin became a palace once more. The marble, cleaned of concrete, shone again. The painted-over frescoes were restored. The gardens, reborn from old plans, bloomed again. Today, Oheka Castle lives a new life. It has become a luxury hotel, a wedding venue, a movie star featured in music videos and TV shows. The castle survived. It endured because the ambition poured into its steel frame proved stronger than time, wars, and human indifference. And that is its ultimate legacy. A castle born from one man's spite was saved and reborn by another man's love. It outlived its creator and his era to tell us an incredible story. A story that shows how even the most selfish dreams, when carved in stone, can leave behind something beautiful and lasting, and that sometimes, To achieve immortality, a creation must outgrow and redeem the motives of its creator.